Hello, my good people. My name's Kevin Bowers, and we are in, this is the third episode of what I've just started to call Conversations with Creatives. I kind of like that. And if you're watching this, my assumption is that you're a young person and that you have some creative impulses. We don't know what they are. They could be musical, they could be artistic, they could be dance, they could be hip hop. And ultimately, here at Conversations with Creatives, we don't really care. What we care about is making sure that those impulses that you're feeling in your guts have sort of gain legitimacy, and that we sort of we want to celebrate it and give it a sort of a space and a narrative that we can sort of turn into life and career and joy and community. And just to know that it's out there, right? That people have sort of forged this path and made a life out of those instincts for creativity. So if you've been following along, I've talked with Teilhard and Gary Raspberry, and it's kind of fun because really these are all everybody that I'm speaking to are connected. The third episode is I'm introducing you now to Mr. Jason Mercer, and he's going to wave to you right now. There's Jason Mercer. Jason is a friend of all of those people and works intimately with all of them kind of all the time, it seems to me. Every time I turn around, either Gary's at your studio or Teilhard's at your studio. And
yeah, I'm the Zelig of Wolfe Island.
That's right. So we're on Wolfe Island, or actually Jason's on Wolfe Island. When I talked to Teilhard, he was also on Wolfe Island, and Jason is sitting. Look at the wall behind it. It's such a cool. It looks like you're in a rib. This is a studio that Jason. Did you build it, or did you just modify it into studio?
I just modified it.
Yeah.
It was here. It's essentially a Quonset hut, a metal garage structure, and as soon as I saw this, when we were looking at this house to buy, my first and immediate thought was my studio. That was the first thing that I saw, and it was a functional garage at the time. It had a big garage door, and it had tools and lawn things, and a tractor in here. And my first thought was, that's perfect. That's where I'm going to put myself.
Totally.
And that's what happened.
Yeah, it's exact. I actually, full disclosure, I also bought a house on Wolfe Island in the recent past.
Yes, you did.
I'm not there now, and I won't be for some years. But very same thing. I kind of walk up. Oh my God, there's a studio. It's and then the house is like, okay, good. There's a house. Okay, there's a studio.
Totally.
Yeah. So. Jason is just so we get the sort of creative bona fides articulated, is a, you're just going to have to accept some of the adjectives.
You tried to label me, man. Yeah. No, please.
Well, adjectives like phenomenal. You're going to have to deal with that. Like a phenomenal bass player, bass player extraordinaire, banjo player, recording artist, and I have heard the stuff coming out of the studio that he's in, and I don't say this out of flattery, but I mean the warmest, fattest tones coming out of this guy's microphones, and I understand. I don't think I've had the luxury yet, but a baker. I believe Jason's getting a bit of a reputation as a baker on the island, and
you have to have your sidebars from the main.
Yeah, right.
So
that's right. Did I hit on most of the creative?
Most of them.
In your fire?
I have some of the things that you left out, because I grew up being in music, anyways, being mostly a sideman. Or a player in a sort of a collective band group dynamic. After those there was a shift afterwards where I moved more into the studio work. I started to get interested in that around the 1999, 2000 sort of era. and about 20 plus years ago. And that was when things sort of shifted, and I kind of added to the resume, producer, engineer,
Right.
And I started wearing some of those hats because they're different, and they took a lot of learning, and I just went head first into it, not really thinking of how deep that hole goes, but it's an incredibly deep hole, and it's taken me 20 plus years just to sort of get a grip on some of those things, and I'm still learning, and but you can add those things to the resume too. And I especially now, with the pandemic and the internet and things, those skills have really come to bear, because I've been able to work via the internet. People send me tracks. I've been able to still complete full albums and work in the studio and sort of maintain my connection to it, which has been really, really great, in this time.
Totally. Yeah. I am curious about that. I think maybe we'll segue back there, but I'm interested in this relationship between being a musician and your trajectory towards being what you call a sideman, and then into the technical part of being an engineer and a producer. And
Sure.
those skills are disparate in a lot of ways. They're very different. But anyways, it'd be interesting to hear the how you negotiated that kind of shift, and maybe why you negotiated that kind of shift.
For sure.
And perhaps that'll come. I thought it might be interesting to start, because we're talking to teenagers here, to go back to high school, and or perhaps even before, but being a young person and having some gift or some ability or some joy or some love for noise and music, and what it was like to sort of capture it and own it, and build a life out of it, and maybe like when do you know that you've sort of done that? I think there's a lot of young people, including myself, right, where it's just like, this is the best thing in my life, like rock and roll. I'm speaking of myself right now. Like, in high school, I would skip school to go to my buddy's basement to jam, right? That was and I cared about it deeply, but I had no sense of that this was a path that was going to make my life. I mean, I'm sure I had embarrassing dreams of being Robert Plant or something, like a rock star, but for the most part, it was these were my friends that did it. This is what I did on the weekend. This is what I thought about. This is why I had a Sony Walkman. But to steer it and mold it into something that's my career, as well, I find it interesting, and I think there's probably lots of people in our audience that are like, have these thoughts, and our culture's not particularly good at giving us a trajectory towards that. Or how are you supposed to think about that? Is that a pie in the sky? Like, what the hell is it? So it might be interesting to hear from you on
question. That. I personally knew exactly what I wanted to do. No, I'm just kidding. You basically described my childhood and my high school experience. I had really no clue where I would end up. I wasn't really thinking in terms of that. I was thinking moment to moment. And it's excellent that you talk about the high school experience, because that was where everything sort of really congealed for me. Gelled for me. I was super into sports. I was a really sporty kid. I played hockey. I loved football. And when I entered high school, I was basically, for lack of a better word, a jock. I had other interests, but I was super into sports still. And two things kind of sidelined me. One was in my ninth grade. I joined the football team, and my second game, and I was a really small kid, and I was on the defense. I was a cornerback for my high school football team, and I was a really good tackler, and I was very fast. So I played cornerback, and I made this tackle, and I ended up at the bottom of a pile of kids, and I felt my ankle pop, and it was I broke my ankle, and that ended my football career right then and there.
Like permanently. That was a serious crack.
It was it sidelined me for that whole season. And the other thing was sort of a similar thing in hockey, where I had sort of an injury, a hockey related injury, and that sidelined me. And that really took me out of that world. And right at that same time, I was hanging out with these friends who I had made in junior high, and they started to really get into music, and they started to form bands, and there were these little pockets of creative people that I was super close with those people, but I wasn't inside the music yet. I hadn't started playing. I wasn't really interested in picking up something yet. And one of those guys is one of the founding members of the Broken Social Scene, Andrew Whiteman. Oh. Andrew and I go right back, and he basically started to really get involved in music. He started to really pursue it, and I was hanging out with him, and I was caught between these two worlds. I didn't really know which way to go. Football and sports was kind of receding, and this kind of creative world started to open up to me, and I was really into it, kind of unknowingly, I would say. But as soon as that door opened, and all of the training and stuff that I had had prior, which I had discussed with you before you started recording, I came from this creative background, and I was wired a certain way towards music from my family. And as soon as that door in high school opened, and my friends started to develop into bands, and started these little creative collectives and pockets of musicians and stuff, there was something in me that unlocked, and I immediately got interested in music. It was very strange. It happened within a few months, I would say, sort of a summer months between grade 9 and 10. And I got super excited about the classical guitar, and I just started to play classical guitar all day, all night. And you know,
it's interesting that it's classical, because that's not, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's an individual instrument, right? As opposed to, like, your friends are doing.
If you're into well, classical guitar is, I would say, it's not really an ensemble thing, but right. The music in general, I was really into it. I don't know why. There's something.
But yeah, it wasn't like someone goes, "Hey, Jason, do you want to play in our band?" It was more like, "Oh my God, there's music going on around me, and my buddies are into it. I pick up a guitar and just start learning." But it wasn't like join my band kind of thing.
It was not a join my band situation. In fact, It was just more like the people that I was hanging out with were doing it, and that unlocked something in me to do it. And my natural instincts and the things that really drove me were classical guitar. I was super into it. I can't explain. Sure. My first teacher, who was a guy named Jack Silver, who I really adored, and I still think of the lessons that he gave me to this day. He told me at one point, he's like, the classical guitar is like it's like a lap piano, is how he put it. My mother was a piano player, a classically trained piano player, and a teacher. And that made perfect sense to me, because you have three voices on the guitar, and the music that I was listening to, Fernando Sorb stuff, Sylvia, Julian Bream, all of those classical guitar, the music coming out of that was exactly that. There were bass notes, there was a middle sort of voice and a higher voice, and you could access it all with your 10 fingers, and it blew my mind. Really opened some things. I was into it probably for about a year before a band situation kind of opened up to me, and all the while around me, all my friends were starting to coalesce into bands. It was really mostly a social scene, I would say. It was people getting together on the weekends, and we'd be in somebody's basement and there would be instruments and people would jam out and we would be drinking beer and doing our high teenager thing, which was just sort of exploring. And it kind of coalesced into little bands. And out of that was this band that formed called the Bourbon Tabernacle Choir with my friend Chris. Andrew Whiteman was involved in that, and there was a whole host of other people. And that was when somebody said to me, "We need a bass player." And I don't even think anyone asked me specifically. It's just that I was playing classical guitar. There were other guitar players, and I just figured, well, it's the same 4 strings, just an octave lower on it than on a guitar. It's the last 4 strings on a guitar, just an octave down. So I figured, well, I'm already learning that. I'll just, how hard can it be? And I started I bought a El Degas bass for I think $110 or something. And I started to play with these guys. And that was kind of how I became a bass player. That's on the side, I should say that my older brother was also playing bass at the time. So it was an honest move. It was like a lateral move in some ways for me, because I was already around it. I was hearing him play all the time. And I just figured, I'll just pick up that and I'll fill that role in this group of musicians, high school friends. And that actually just kept on rolling. I mean, we weren't thinking big picture. We were really thinking next party or next weekend or something like that.
Sure.
And then it really kind of came into focus when my friend Chris kind of signed us up. In my high school, we had these lunchtime concert series. So during lunchtime, they would open up the auditorium to anybody, any creative thing. You could sign up for it. So you could be a dancer, you could read poetry, you could do anything you wanted for 30 minutes during lunchtime. And you had time slots. And Chris signed us up and sort of just actively formed this band and signed us up. And I think we had 10 minutes and that was it. And that started the whole thing for me. And it was a crazy scene. It was a big auditorium. It was a big high school auditorium.
This is Toronto, correct?
Toronto, yeah. It was Lawrence Park for anybody who's interested. And we had, basically it was 3 bands kind of mushed into one ginormous circus band. And that was exactly how it started. There was more than 14 people on stage.
Whoa.
We had projected movies behind us. It was insane. It was super fun though. And after it had happened, I think it was a collective, what's next? Where do we go?
Right.
When's the next one? That was great. That was super cool and fun. And that's kind of how it started. I wasn't really thinking big picture at all. We were definitely thinking next thing to next thing. All the while, it was mostly a social organization, I would say, of our friends and extended friends. It rotated from basement to basement, and then that turned into kind of like high school dances, and then that morphed into gigs in and around Toronto, and then morphed into a tour, and then it just kept on rolling. I will say the thing that sort of fed it during the high school years, we entered a battle of the bands, which are common, I think. I'm not sure how they must have them now still, but it was a high school battle of the bands being held sort of in the North Toronto region. And we won that. And with that came a money prize and a recording. We we won a recording, which I think was 2 songs in a professional studio. And that started the whole thing. That was kind of how it started to roll. And then it just never stopped. And then, you know, once you're in it and you were obsessed with it, like we all were,
Right.
you're basically eating and breathing that all day, all night. You're just sort of, you're thinking about it, you're practicing, you're listening, you're discussing with your friends, you're really absorbed and you know, the world is your oyster. And back then we had to work a little harder, I think, to find the music. You had to go, you had the radio, you had TV wasn't really a thing, although it was starting to come in. So video and other mediums. It was mostly, you know, records, vinyl, and tapes. And we would just, every weekend we'd go down, or every sort of free time that we had, we would go downtown into Toronto. There were 3 or 4 hot record stores that we would hit all the time.
Sam the Record Man.
Sam the Record Man, Vinyl Museum. What was the other one? There was another one just sort of off of Dundas and Yonge. I forget what it was called. But anyways, and we would just load up, and we would, you know, we'd take all of our after school earnings from whatever horrible jobs we had, and we would just load up on tapes and vinyl, and then scoot back like a bunch of rats to somebody's basement, and we would, you know, excitedly go through everything and listen to it all and absorb all of that stuff.
That's great.
And that was sort of my high school experience. And like I said, a lot of it was social.
Yeah.
You know, we were all kind of learning how to play our instruments and learning music on some level technically, but the social aspect was a huge part of my background, Chris Brown's background. I'm pretty sure Teilhard too, because he was a mod, so he was involved in a really strong social circle that's informed by music.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were the same. We were just sort of influenced by different influences, I would say.
Well, that's great just sort of some themes to sort of pluck for our audience there, right? Like I like that moment where you're all sort of doing it, and just out of love and of the music and community, and, you know, drinking beers in the basement, and, you know, just being a teenager. But I guess it was Chris, you said, that said, we're doing it on the stage. We're freaking doing it. Like, that's right. Like, we're playing and having fun, but now we're freaking doing it. And I just want young people to think about that, right? Like, because that could not happen, right? Like, it would be easy for a bunch of buddies for high school. You're only going to know your high school friends for 3 or 4 years, right? And then you're going to move on. And if someone didn't sort of stand up in that social circle, that creative social space, and go, come on, guys, like, we're doing something with this. We're not just sort of goofing off here. This isn't just sort of weekend frivolity. This is too important. God damn it, let's put it on a stage. And it usually takes someone, right? There's some, you know, someone has to be that catalyst, that spark, to sort of like give it gravity and give it sort of official status of, you know, I think art requires that. Art requires the guts to sort of say, yeah, I'm not playing around anymore. This is this is for the world. So think about that as a young person, right? Like, because it's easy to be, and I think I suffer from this a little bit, just sort of like, what's the right word for that? Just sort of like, maybe it's laziness or humbleness, or, you know, like, just sort of like, yeah, this is great. I'm having fun with my buddies, and that step of sort of going, no, I'm putting up posters, I'm making phone calls, I'm getting a grant, I'm going to shake some, write a bunch of letters to the pubs to give me a gig, and then I'm going to ask for money, and I'm going to, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Those are different skills than just being a kicking guitar player or a great painter, or, I really like dancing.
True. Yeah, that's true. I mean, for our social circle, for my social circle at that time, and even now, Chris Brown was the driving force. I'm sure you'll be talking to Chris.
Yeah, he's on my docket. Yeah,
it was Chris that had the inspiration and the foresight to sort of sign us up, to see that there was an opportunity, and that he was the one who had the sort of vision, and he signed us up for that high school stage. And I will say, once you follow what you love, that I would say that the motivating force, which leads you to all of those things that you just mentioned, is in pursuance of what you really love doing. The reason we got so involved and so absorbed, I would say, is because we really loved doing that stuff. We didn't think about how it was going to affect our careers and other, because I came from a pretty conservative, as did Chris, as did Andrew Whiteman, all of us in high school. We came from a very conservative background, white. Sort of the idea was that you would complete high school and then go and be a lawyer or a doctor, and our high school was geared towards that. It wasn't a creative high school. It wasn't like an liberal arts high school. It was a very conservative, numbers oriented, career path type high school, which is kind of why in some ways we came together as a creative group, because there wasn't no alternative. So, hanging out in these groups was our path. But I will just say that the love of what we were doing, when we sort of identified personally, and almost without knowing it, but just what was moving us, we were so into it. And so the love of doing it made us do all of those other things, made us do the postering, made us reaching out. It was like one gig that would just feel so great would motivate us to do the next one. It was really in pursuance of what we loved. That to me hasn't been lost. I still follow that tenet. Mm-hmm. Do what you love and let all the other things kind of slide. And you have to be aware of money or business, or there are other things involved. It's more complex, but the bottom line for me, even to this day, is doing what I love when I love to do it, if you can control it, and you try to gear or steer, I would say, your paths towards those things, and out of it comes great things. A career, you get paid. Mm-hmm. You can move those forces in a way that can be recognized in other ways, monetarily or socially, but you're really just doing what you love. And that was the most important motivating thing for myself and all of my high school friends.
Yeah, that's well said, man. You mentioned that you came from a conservative sort of milieu. It sounds like family and culture and just sort of the school, the institutions that you were in.
My family, not so much, but
okay.
My neighborhood, yes.
Neighborhood, yeah. Okay. But this idea that there is a trajectory through, Canadian suburban or urban life that, like you mentioned, lawyer is, that, our culture is sort of comfortable with a certain trajectory.
Yeah.
I work a lot with young people, and this, this comes up a lot, right? Like I'm teaching film students and writers and musicians, and there's a great tension, right, between like, well, going to university, getting your degree, and then you can sort of like, or, you know, get something that'll get you a job, and then all that other stuff is, that's great, honey, you know, but
Yeah.
make sure you got your ducks
Sure.
lined up, right?
Yeah.
And that's set out of love, you know, clearly, like people care that you can build a life and a career that's sustainable. But it is at odds with this this narrative, and I think this you know, wisdom that says, no, find what you love, and you have to really, part of this, and I think you've made this clear, is you have to really love it. It's not like you love it as the idea of it. You have to love it in its minutia. You have to love it when you're in your bedroom alone. What you do is you pick up your bass or your paintbrush or your camera, right? Like it's not like, I love the idea of being a rock star. It's, I love this instrument. I freaking love this thing.
Yeah,
And
it is an expression, an external expression of your insides. For me, it was very multifaceted. It moved across different instruments. You know, it really is. You're exactly right. It's you do it because you can't do anything else almost. I mean, it's like an expression of yourself. So yeah, all the work and everything that goes into that is driven by that love. And you can, you know, there's lots of mental hoops that you go through to make it happen. But, and by that I mean, it's not fun all the time, practicing all the time. But if you're really interested in the instrument or the dance or the words, then you find the time, you do that work, and it doesn't feel like work. It's
right.
it, you know, you're just expressing yourself because you really love it. I will say, just to touch on what you had mentioned earlier, my neighborhood and the high school and the system that I came out of was incredibly conservative, incredibly white, upper middle class to upper middle class. And the one super weird thing in my background is that both of my parents were creatives. So I had support. I'm sure they were concerned what was going to happen to me, but my parents both really supported what I was into and what I was doing, and were tickled, I think, that I found something that was outside of the normal box that our whole neighborhood was kind of geared towards, because they themselves were creative people. My mother was you know, she was a
Homekeeper, I think that's the word, isn't it? Homemaker.
Homemaker, thank you.
That's the word, yeah.
You know, she took care of us, and she made the home a home at the expense of her own creative sort of juices. And she was a classically trained piano player. She had her teacher's degree in music, and she had, before she got married and had kids, had been pursuing a musical career of some sort. She was involved in other things too, but that never stopped. She always found time in our home to practice and play music, and she wanted us to have a background in music, so she made us take lessons.
Right.
My father was an artist, both fine and he was a fine artist. He did watercolor paintings, but he also did graphic design. That was his job. And you know, I grew up with a very visual sense of things, because we would see the paintings that he would do and complete, and we would also see the things that he'd been working on in print media and on television and stuff, you know, because at the time it was still hand drawn, a lot of hand drawn ads, a lot of hand drawn things. So that was the kind of, so my parents both were creative people, they instilled in my family a sense that it was okay to be creative and to pursue those things. And that was pretty outside the norm, I would say.
Right.
And I'm very thankful that I probably would have done it anyways, with or without their help, but it certainly helped grease the wheels in knowing that, they understood and they had my back in certain things. And they would be the people who handed us the car keys, and said, here, take the car for your first gig outside of Toronto.
Right.
Fully realizing that we could potentially crash the car. But they were the ones who were like, it's okay, here are the keys, go for it. So that wasn't the norm, I will say. And
so you didn't feel the tension that others might from family.
Well, not to the same degree. Socially, and in my neighborhood and high school pressure, absolutely. There were all of our teachers, they were just like, what are you guys up to? And you're going to be ruining your life. And there were social pressures to bear, for sure. And our whole neighborhood was all sort of geared up that way.
Right.
But I wasn't really thinking about that. Again, I'll just circle back. Once we started to roll, it was really just like we were pursuing what we loved, so it did not matter. We didn't really care. In fact, it fueled it, to buck the system or to be alternative. It helped us, I would say.
Yeah, and you guys were successful. Well, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I certainly remember the Bourbon Tabernacle Choir. How old are you? I'm 53.
I am also 53.
Is that right? Oh my goodness.
Okay. Man.
There you go. Okay, because I can't remember when I saw you guys, but like you would have toured around my high school, I think
for sure.
Waterloo. I saw you guys way before I knew any of you, but
we were definitely a successful band, like right at a time where the media was very limited, I would say, limited access. So it was all word of mouth. When I think about it, and I think about the work and stuff that went in and the kind of success that we did have, it's pretty remarkable because it was all word of mouth. It was all experiential. It was gig to gig and social scene to social scene. And we built sort of a mini empire, I would say.
Yeah, no, you did. You guys had, I could speak to that from a suburban kid in Waterloo. Like the Bourbon Tabernacle Choir was sort of a touring sort of party. Yeah, I was just like, oh my God, they're coming. That's fun. Like, woohoo. I didn't have their albums. I think some of my friends did, but it was more like parties coming to town.
You didn't want those. No, I'm just kidding. No, we were a live band, and
you were a live band. Yeah, you'd come to Kitchener, and it was a dance party, and it was
a dance. Yeah, and clubs loved us because, they just wanted to sell as much beer as possible, and we would get everybody dancing and drinking, and that really helped fuel, our touring and how things rolled for us. But
how long did that sustain itself? So after it's like you're done high school. Pardon me?
It lasted for 10 years.
10 years, okay.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I ended up moving on from that. I would pretty much, I think across the board, we all put our 100% to that band. And when it folded, which was a really interesting and learning experience, and it was very hard. When you do something, just one thing for so long and then it collapses, you have to, it really makes an impact on you. And
yeah, it must have been scary.
It was very scary, but it was an incredible thing to go through and to realize that there are other things in the world. I didn't stop. although I have to, to be fully candid and honest, I thought I would quit, for sure after that experience, because
Quit being a touring musician.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
And throughout my career, there have been moments where I was just like, that's it, I'm done, and tried to leave it. But invariably there's a spark inside. The fire, if you metaphorically, if your fire is burning super hot, and the fires inevitably go out, and from an ash or from a teeny little spark, another whole bonfire can be started. Right. And it was an incredible experience to go from those highs to a very low period where, because I had been so involved in one band, it kind of put me out of the races for a lot of other things. I hadn't pursued a career as a studio musician. I wasn't on call as an A player. I wasn't involved in other bands. Right. It was only one thing. And I really thought that was sort of it for me. And then each time that sort of happened throughout my career, something invariably came along, and I ultimately got to understand that it's a cycle. There would always be something. And it may not be music. It could be something totally else. But even in the lowest periods, I took what's the word? Solace in knowing that something will come along, and really waited for it, even at different times of my career. The first few times were really hard, and they were a shock to the system. But out of that Bourbon early experience in high school band, high school friends, came a whole other world of professional musicians, studying jazz, working with incredible songwriters. And then that parlayed into another whole world, which was the world of the studio, and working as a studio musician, but also on the other side of the glass, working as a producer and as an engineer. And all of those worlds kind of unfolded as other things kind of closed. So that saying, one door closes, another one opens, in my case, was absolutely 100% true. And I came to understand it, and I came to take solace in it, that if something finished, if something ended, you just had to sit and wait for the next thing. Now, those things could be lined right up. You could be a super creative person that people want, and the next thing might just come along like that. And in some cases that happened to me. In other cases, I had to really wait for it, and I had to really think, what do I want? What is driving me? What do I really love? What's inside that wants to come out? And in some cases I had to wait, longer periods of time, and that was stressful. But I also understood that something invariably would come along. And it was sort of in those periods of time where I reflected on music. Should I even pursue music? Should I get out of music? Are there other interests? You mentioned baking. Those were some of the things that I was always there were other aspects. Some people are gifted with one thing. That's all they do. In my case, maybe because of my background, my varied family sort of situation, I have many things that really drive me and really excite me. And they're outside. Some of them are outside of music. I've done a whole host of things outside of music, which have driven me in the same ways as music. And actually informed it too. I think it's really important to express yourself in other ways, especially for younger people, to understand that it's not just one thing. There can be many things. Maybe too many things could be a little bit tricky to handle, and you might not dedicate as much time to those things. But even within music, there are so many aspects and facets. In my own background, the things that have driven me are classical music, jazz music, R&B, country music, old time banjo, fiddle music, bluegrass, and all of those things in and of themselves, you could spend a whole lifetime learning. And in fact, some forms really demand it, right, like jazz or even bluegrass. I always equated my learning of bluegrass to my learning of jazz, and classical too. And it becomes sort of a bag of tools that you can pull from if you're really fully into it. If you immerse yourself in those worlds, they can become, you can become a master of those crafts, but you can also become pretty teleoscopic, which is the term, where things become so tunnel visioned that you don't see other things.
Right.
But some people are driven that way. Myself, I always recognized that there were many facets within music, but even outside of music. And those things always thrill me. And I think it's really important to inform these things. They're not all like compartmentalized. These things inform other things. My baking, I love baking. I love to bake. It's really, I can't explain it. I used to, watch my mother bake. I used to love sitting around in the kitchen and she'd pull out hot muffins or something from the oven. I would be like, ah! I'd want to eat them. I also, now I just love making that. And it's sort of a similar creative process. There's a lot of patience. There's a lot of love. There's a lot of knowledge. The end result, for me, I love sharing those baked things. I don't just sit around and eat a whole cake by myself, although I'm capable of it. Absolutely. But, those things inform each other too. And you can learn from all of these things. So, my banjo playing, a great example, when I got interested in the banjo, which was probably around 89, 90, 91.
So the bourbons were still a thing at that point. That was mid bourbons.
That's
sure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And this instrument came along. I wasn't really expecting it. It just sort of it was like a flash, just like I heard some music flashed into my mind. What is that? And I started to get interested in it. As soon as I started to learn it and I started to pursue the music, bluegrass music at that time, and banjo music is really fast. There's a lot of notes. It's very syncopated, and there's mostly written in 16th notes. So there's a lot of notes and it happens very fast. Once I started to focus and learn that, my bass playing became incredibly tight, because I was so focused on, and with banjo, it's so strident sonically that you hear every note if you're playing it right or wrong. It's like a hard plink.
Right.
That you can immediately, your brain can hear if it's right or wrong. And that, is consistent with the tone, but also with the timing.
Yeah, bad banjo sucks.
Yeah, and that's for sure. And the more I pursued banjo music and playing banjo, my bass playing became so much better. It was so crazy, and I recognized it too at the time. I was just like, wow, this is amazing, man. I'm gonna keep on doing that.
Yeah. And I'm sure that classical guitar playing too must have given you a leap, right? Like all that dexterity in the fingers, like all these
Absolutely.
things are,
they're all, and that's kind of my point, is that these things are in and of themselves, they're their own thing, but they inform other things, and there's threads, there's commonalities, there's all sorts of things. If you're open minded enough, then you start to see them and you're like, this is incredible. I mean, my skill as a banjo player with the finger picking is a direct relation to my learning classical guitar. There's no doubt,
Mhm.
same patterns even.
Yeah.
And then weirdly enough, like my bass playing started to inform my banjo playing, inform my bass playing, bass player inform my banjo playing. I mean, it's truly a marvel, and it's a wonder, really, and when it's, I'm in awe and wonder at what's happening pretty much all the time, and that's without the drugs.
Yeah, right. Right. That's a gratitude thing. That's one in our high school at LCVI, our motto is grit, growth, and gratitude. Which is nice, right? And that was new.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I remember when we actually came up with that, I was sitting at the table, and I think it was Paul Goldring is one of my colleagues who was proposing it at a staff meeting or whatever, and grit, growth, and gratitude. And it took my brain a second, and I was like, gratitude, that one's gonna be a bump for people. Like grit and growth, these are words, these are educational words, right? Like have grit and growth mindset. These are things that we study as educators. But gratitude was sort of the curveball in there. And it took me, I thought that's kind of profound. Like that's the right word.
Oh man.
As
well,
we're
I'm
entering
sure
the world, right?
Our high school logo was probably dominate, crush, and and I'm not even joking. I'm pretty sure.
And it was probably in Latin too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh man. Well, it's funny that you should talk about gratitude, because one of the early experiences that I experienced, and I don't wish this on anybody, but we were touring. I was with my friend Chris and the whole band, the Bourbons, and we had a very near-death experience. And we crashed our van.
Oh my!
It was incredibly scary. It was a miracle that we all survived, to be honest.
Wow, is that right?
Van, it was super bad, and it could have gone sideways in milliseconds, really. And out of that experience, a huge understanding of how fleeting life can be, and the gratitude that we all felt to be alive, and the humility that came along with it, luckily I kind of learned it early. I think I was probably 19 years old, maybe, or 18. Wow. When that happened. So, yeah, it's funny that you should mention that. The big picture, we live on a ball in space, and there's nothing around us for millions of light years. And that just alone is a miracle and a marvel to behold. Yeah. And that's enough to drive whatever forces you have inside as a teenager or as a creative person to just do it, because there's really not a lot
right
out there. So, this is the thing. This is the time. This is the place. It's a miracle.
You're here.
Yeah.
Do you by chance have a banjo or something else that makes noise near you that you could
yeah.
Typically I'm getting some performance going on here. It'd be great.
I have actually funny. I was just playing this today. So I have this is an interesting banjo, which I just recently bought. I have many banjos. If you're a musician, you can totally relate to this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just like 1 minute you look in the corner and there's 2 instruments, and the next minute you look over, there's 9. And it's like they breed.
It's a miracle.
This is totally. This is a banjo from the late 1800s. I believe it's around 1887 to 1890.
Holy smokers.
And it was put together in Toronto, of all places, believe it or not. I didn't know any of this until I got it. I was actually learning. So, slight aside, I took lessons, and I consider myself a student of Tony Trischka. And Tony is a banjo master and educator, and just an incredible person. And there was a piece of music that I was listening to. Well, I've listened to it for years, but it's a really complicated sort of old timey kind of feeling ragtime sort of piece that Tony wrote. And during the pandemic and the lockdown, I was just like, I'm going to learn that. So I started to learn it, and it's played on a nylon string banjo, which this is. And so I was really interested in that sound. I didn't have an instrument, a banjo that had nylon strings. So I was playing this old timey song on a modern banjo, which just didn't really sound right. Didn't feel right, that's for sure. But I learned the piece, and then this thing came along and I bought it immediately. And it's just this, it's a remarkable, like crazy, it's a banjo, but the craftsmanship is just like really, it's really beautiful. So I'm just like, when I look at it and play it, I'm just like, this thing is amazing. I love this thing. And you can't really play it in the same way. Like you can't play it with picks so much. It's kind of it's a delicate, strange instrument. It has its own voice, I guess. And
yeah, sure.
But it was perfect for learning that piece, you know, and I'm inspired to play it. It came with its own inspiration.
Totally.
I was playing this morning. Yeah. I was actually learning this sort of a British piece, British Isles piece. Something like that.
Nice. Ain't that pretty? I do love how an instrument insists itself upon your fingers, right? It's like, no, you're going to be playing me like this. I feel that.
Yeah.
Like I pick up a certain instrument and it's like, it just makes me feel some way, and I attack it with a certain attitude because it insists. It sounds like that.
This thing has that in spades. You know, you can't play it like a normal banjo. You can't drive like, you know, a modern banjo with steel strings wants to be driven. You know, the sound is louder, the tensions are higher, the length of the instrument is bigger. There's a resonator on the back. This is an Openback, considered an Openback banjo. So, you know, it's a lot quieter. It doesn't project out. And it's a whole other thing. And plus, like just how old it is, you know, it just doesn't want to be played like a modern banjo. And it tells me that, like,
yeah.
It's wanting to be.
You sent me a video of you playing banjo. I think you might have said it was for a competition or something. It was the happiest damn song I ever heard. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a song that I was learning. I was learning that piece. Yeah, that was the first contest. I'll just say, banjo to me, it started really as sort of like my third instrument. You know, electric bass was my first. I got interested in double bass, so acoustic double bass. I started pursuing that, and then the banjo kind of came along. And it was sort of always in the wings. It wasn't really a primary instrument. That changed probably about 7 or 8 years for me, where I got myself a little travel banjo, which is just back there. You know, just a half-sized, it's about 2 feet long, but it still plays like a banjo. And I started to take that around when I traveled, and that changed everything for me. I started playing it like every single day, and learning pieces, and sitting around in airports, I'd be playing the thing, and sitting in planes, I'd be playing the thing, and, you know, in cars, and just driving all my friends and family nuts. But for me, it was just like the thing that I was obsessed with it. And it changed the banjo to being sort of competing as a primary instrument for me. Where was I going with that?
Happy tune competition.
Oh yes, right. So I was I lived in New York and I was involved in a bluegrass scene there. And when I moved to Wolfe Island, one of the things that I was really concerned about, or sort of, I wouldn't say regretting, but I was aware that I would be losing that social circle and the consistency of playing every day with people, pretty much, and playing those tunes, until I met Teilhard Frost. And when I met Teilhard, it was like, oh my God, a person like me who loves banjo music like crazy. And he's an incredible fiddler. And I started, but Teilhard's background is different from mine. I was much more involved in strict bluegrass music. He comes from this whole other branch of the tree, which is more old-timey and fiddle driven. And his knowledge is like really almost beyond compare. I mean, he knows so much about those worlds. So totally. I started to play with him, and he was informing me about this whole new world, which I was totally aware of. I just wasn't involved in it. And that was one of the songs that I learned. It was a really challenging thing. So Teilhard and I started to play fiddle tunes, old-time fiddle tunes on the banjo and fiddle. My background being sort of more bluegrass, melodic playing, I started to approach those songs from a standpoint of learning them note for note, learning the fiddle tunes, which kind of connects me to Tony Trish, because I was doing that with Tony. He released a whole compendium of fiddle tunes to learn on the banjo. And I was already learning them, but they were like much more traditional, straight up bluegrass tunes. Teilhard was showing me all these old time fiddle tunes, and they were really hard to learn note for note. But I started to do it, and it opened up a whole world for me. And kind of after probably of playing those things for about a year, this old time, the pandemic was happening, and all the festivals, all the bluegrass festivals and old time festivals were going online. And there was one that just came up right at that time when I was learning all these tunes, and it was an old time fiddle contest for banjo. It was a banjo, old time banjo contest. And I decided to enter with some of these old time fiddle tunes, but played on the banjo. And I chose the song by a guy named Gary Harrison. He's a fiddle player that Teilhard showed me. And he was a modern old time player, but he's really considered, he's part of the canon now. He wrote these songs that were really beautiful, very fiddly, that a lot of people play, at festivals and stuff. I don't even remember. I honestly don't even remember that song back.
Okay.
Let's see. Shoot. I can't remember. Give me a second.
Sure, of course.
There it is. That's the line. That's the fiddle line, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's so open. That's what I love about it. It's so much breath in it, and it's so open. When you played that recording, I was like, I was probably on Facebook. I was just flipping through, and then Jason posted something. I was like, I was mesmerized by it.
Yeah. It was something like that, and it's a very challenging piece to play note for note on the banjo, because the banjo itself is an open tuned chord. It's not unlike piano or a guitar. It's not really a linear instrument where you can play scales and things easily up and down a scale, and it sort of all follows in a pattern. On the banjo, to play a linear scale, you kind of have to fingering wise and technically, you're jumping back and forth between strings, and it's very unconventional and unlinear. For example, you know, a scale, normal major scale in G would sound like this. On the banjo, you're playing the second string, and then you're playing the fourth string, and then you're playing the third string, and then the second string.
Right.
And then you're playing this crazy fifth string. And, you know, it's sort of like, it's one step forward, one step back, and you have to figure out, and, you know, with a fiddle tune, in the nature of what Teilhard has been showing me in these old time fiddle tunes, boy, are they ever like all over the map. The melodies are all like sort of squirrely fiddle playing melodies.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure them out note for note on the banjo, which is really hard, but it's been great. It's been good for my mind. It's been good for my fingering. It's been really good to get to know the banjo. I was learning a tune just the other day with Teilhard. I mean, we learned it a little while ago, but we started to play it again, and it's an interesting tune. Check this out. You know, like it's got those those uncomfortable
dirty
notes in it.
Yeah.
And then actually that one's got the B section is really challenging too. It's something like that. Something like, I mean, it's really bouncy. On the fiddle, it's like right under the fingers. So those guys are just playing. I mean, I'm sure it's a challenge for them too, but it's made for the fiddle. So to play those sort of things, like these leaps, you know, like that's not ergonomic on the banjo.
That's right.
But it's a lot of fun. And it's,
in terms of creativity too, I mean, that's an interesting one of the sort of like elements of creativity is limitation, boundary, like giving yourself a task that forces decisions to happen. And we often think of creativity, I think wrongly, as this, freedom, like, you know, do whatever you want, like here's a crayon, just go. And I think that's not, I mean, there's a place for that potentially, but this idea of saying you're going to take a fiddle tune, which has, it's a massive limitation for an attitude towards a banjo. Like a banjo could go in any number of directions. Fiddle tune is this sort of like, not random, but very limiting subset of its potential. And by forcing your brain to do it, and you've said many times, it's really hard, right? Because you're a man who's, you know, spent his life with strings, and you're going, holy crap, this is a challenge. I gotta make my brain, you know, and sort of conform to this limitation that I've placed on this thing. And it creates something new and something novel in the universe that is and it sounds novel to me when I hear you play in this way. It's like, I mean, I'm not going to claim to be any, you know, I do love my bluegrass, and I know some old timey, and I know Teilhard, but the way you're playing it there, to my ear, it's kind of novel. It's it feels open and snaky in a way that I'm not particularly used to.
Yeah, me neither. And you know, it's interesting, just to get back on the creative side of things. You know, I was so jazzed that to find that there was sort of a kindred spirit on this island just a few blocks away, but who had a really different background from me. I was really interested in learning from him. I became a student again, you know, in some ways. And I forced Teilhard to play. He plays these things really fast. These songs are meant to be played fast at dances. You know, they get the feet moving and you jig around and dance. And I forced him to play them like this, like. know, like I had to make him show me note for note, and he gave me recordings to work from. And, you know, with technology now, you can slow those things down.
Right.
And, but I had to, you know, from a creative side, I had to do a lot of work. And I'm still doing tons of work on it. I had to do the math, the mental math, to figure out what these notes were, to find out what the melodies were, and then to find out where those melodies could be played on this super, you know, incredible instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole process, it was a process because it involved the spark, it involved the desire to learn, it involved the mechanics of learning, and I'm still learning these things. It required me to take things incredibly slow, which is one of the lessons that my guitar teacher, my original guitar teacher, Jack Silver, told me. He said that there were 4 different types of learning, and that stuck with me. And one of them is, you know, you have to learn something fast, you have to learn it slow. And weirdly enough, if you do things slow and methodical, you actually get to play the fast stuff faster than if you just like jump into it and get frustrated and mess up and get off track. If you're methodical about it, yeah, me too. I mean, holy smokes. But that was one of the things that I had to really, with songs, there was a real creative process just to learn them. And I really do feel that creative itch being scratched because it's very mechanical. I had to play these things ad nauseum, and I still have to play it. And like even now, I'm like, geez, how does this one go? Because there's so many fingerings and possibilities, and it's a challenge to pick out those melodies. And you know, if you don't do it every day, you sort of forget them. And I hadn't played that probably, well, not since that recording. That was last summer, by the way.
Right.
So it was a year ago. But I was just like, when you mentioned it, I was like, oh man, first of all, what song was that? And how did it go? You know, but it comes back to you. I mean, it's all in there.
Yeah.
But, you know, that process is a really interesting one because it's sort of whatever motivates you to do it. For me, it was just I really wanted to learn these songs, and I really wanted to learn them on the banjo. And it was an unusual thing. And even Teilhard was like, wow, I don't hear this kind of playing that often. And that was just like reassurance for me. Just like, yeah, this is worthy. This is a cool thing to do. That's apart from just wanting to do it.
Right.
And, you know, and it's out of that has come, Teilhard and I are working on an album of banjo and fiddle music. Probably very limited audience, but who might enjoy it. But you know, we don't really care. We're still doing it. We're pursuing it. So that's a creative project that just kind of came out of us hanging out, and my desire to learn these tunes, his desire to play with somebody like me, and yeah, it's an interesting thing just to sit back and behold. But when you're into it, you're just kind of doing it. I'm just doing it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna like pull back thematically a little bit, and just for the young people here, in terms of the creative life that you've sort of pieced together for yourself has a lot to do with sort of learning. Like the fact that here we are at 53, and you're totally pumped by giving yourself some sort of like exercise, right? I'm going to turn fiddle tunes into banjo tunes, and it's really freaking hard, and I got to use technology to slow it down, and I got to meet people to help me. And, you know, that I just want to sort of like pause and like sort of not take that for granted as a life. You know, when you get to be the age of Jason and I, it's a bit rare, I think, for people to be in the habit of wanting to learn and to push yourself into newness, you know, after, you know, at sort of the, you know, mid-late career, right? Like doing this thing. And it's like, I get the, it's clear that you don't really have a choice. This is just how you are, and you will always be pushing yourself towards newness and novelty and sort of community and creativity.
Yeah, I mean,
what I want to say is it's one of the
yeah.
benefits of arts and culture as a choice in life, right? That it's like to sort of have a trajectory in your life where the passions are rich enough and the choices are sustainable, that you literally can't help but learn for the rest of your life. And that's a kind of a beautiful thing, right? And it's not a given in this life. Our culture doesn't, if you go and do pick a life trajectory that's maybe more clear, right? You're going to become and there's nothing wrong with any of these things I'm about to say, but it's like, oh, the college or the university has this career path, and I'm going to jump in because that's what I'm supposed to do because I'm 19 or whatever. That can be a completely successful trajectory as well. But I think it's worth pausing and going, a life that came from this like passion and urge and necessity and community and love, and that it has this sort of rolling narrative that sort of never ends and keeps the brain and the limbs engaged and centered and focused and passionate. Yeah. And that's so when we're talking about like a life in arts, it's one of the benefits.
That was exactly my thought. I was like, you're describing a life in the arts, because there is a lot of those same things in business. People get jazzed in the same way.
Absolutely.
And pursuing those activities. But the arts sort of somewhat separated because socially they're so needed and they're so much a part of the fabric, but they're also kind of derided and underfunded and appreciated. And it's an interesting thing because when you are involved in the arts, in the sort of creative arts, I think it does hit you to things, to ideas that do fall back on themselves and give you an incredible appreciation for not just your art form, but for humanity in general, and for loving. You get inspiration and you see things in nature. And
that's right. Yeah, it's good for consciousness. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's a really, really beautiful mental thing to place to put yourself. Like I said, you can find those places in other worlds, but the arts, there is something connected, because the arts are not words. They're not. I mean, they can be written, but my experience, anyways. I am through notes and through music. I'm not a singer. I don't write songs. For me, it's just purely a musical experience, and it's a very visual and tactile kind of thing for me. But I get so much pleasure out of that, and it's informed by things like gardening and stuff. Like I'll get just as much crazy pleasure and appreciation from working in the garden and growing my own food. But they're so interlocked, and you do have I think, broader sense of that if you're in a creative environment.
Yeah. Well said, my good man.
I mean, these are pretty broad generalizations, but I mean, for me, it's been an incredible ride, and I don't really see it stopping anytime soon, because it can this sort of idea transfers not just from music, but it transfers to baking, it transfers to messing around in the garden. I've built a couple of things, including the studio, and that was a super thrill for me. And on the same sort of level, in some ways, it was a real creative process trying to figure out what this place would look like on the inside, and choices that I made were really fun to make. I was what's the word? There was nobody telling me what to do.
Right.
I was
Figuring it out.
unadulterated, or what's the word? I don't know.
Yeah, you got the idea. We talked briefly at the beginning about the studio work.
Yeah.
And that has become a big part of who you are and what you do. And it's an interesting, like I too have a studio. I love it. I love sort of recording and playing and overdubbing, and but I can't say that there are technical parts to it that I find like aren't natural to me, and I'm a busy enough guy, and I got enough joy with just like playing my music with my friends and gigging and recording, that I haven't gone to the place where you have, which is like being a professional, people coming in and expecting a certain kind of product, and you being able to deliver like, bam, I can do this, and I don't feel crappy about that. It's just not where my
totally.
But I guess to my point is like that's a skill set I can speak with some authority that is very different than picking up, learning your scales and practicing an instrument, like understanding, for instance, how to use compression. Is now that might be beyond the scope of some of our listeners, but it's one of the dials on your recording device that has a big impact on your sound. But it's to figure out how to put compression on a bass drum as opposed to a snare or on a vocal, and then knowing how that's going to sit into a mix, that's a life's work. I think to get a good tone on a bass drum is freaking strangely difficult. I think I got a decent one, here and there, but I think someone at your level can say, okay, well, this funk band, this is the tone I'm going for, and this is a rock band. I've heard your material, your work enough to know that you're dialing it in with professionalism and surety that from years of experience. So I'm intrigued by that, and I'll hope my intrigue follows to the audience here. That these are
again, that was another pursuit where I was really just following a path that I wasn't really conscious of it. Like it found me in some ways. When I got super excited. I mean, first of all, I'm a bit of a left brain, right brain kind of personality. I have a lot of creative juices that I do, and that one side of my brain is like really super jazzed about creativity. The other side is like sort of the I'm very structured.
Technical.
I'm very technically minded. I'm a nerd.
The minutia nerd guy. You have to be.
I don't mind that stuff. I'm actually kind of drawn towards it. So that started for me while I was on tour. I was touring with a woman named Defranco at the time. It was a large tour. We were in buses and we were playing large.
If the audience doesn't know, you maybe tell them a little bit. I mean, Annie Defranco is not a name that you can just drop without, because this audience might not know who she is, but someone of my age does. I mean, she's famous and important artist.
Right. Well, she is an incredible songwriter and an artist, and a performer. She basically was sort of the queen of her own queendom, because she was a do-it-yourself artist that had her own record label, her own touring company, her own company, before it was really fashionable to do so.
Righteous Babe Records. I remember that.
Righteous Babe Records. Yeah, you can look her up, and she was also an early voice for women, and she was an active person, and just an incredible creative person. And I was lucky enough to play with her for 5+ years and tour. And anyways, it was on one of those tours actually where I was actually sitting with some of her crew in their bus, and one of them was goofing around on this lap, and I had just got my first laptop. It was like this was like a big deal. It was like a laptop, holy, like what an invention. And you know, I was so excited about the laptop, and I was watching my friend doing things on his laptop. And I was like, what are you doing? He was like, oh, I've got this recording program. And he was messing around with this recording program on his laptop. And I'd never seen that before. I was just like, wow, what is that? Like, you can record on this thing? Like, holy, it's really cool.
Yeah.
He was like, well, I'll set you up with some stuff. So he basically gave me this DVD, you know, full of programs for me to check out and install onto my computer. And they were all music related, essentially. So there was software for recording, there was software for looping things, there was editing software that he gave me for free. And it was like one of those things where it was like, as soon as that door opened, it just went like huge for me. And I just went down that rabbit hole like immediately. And I just started to try to learn the software. I was fascinated that you could, on a computer, you know, you could record music into it and you could take it with you. You know, you weren't like, you weren't a slave to a studio. You didn't have to go, and I was just like, this is incredible. And I started to fool around with it. I started to learn the program, and I really didn't have much of an outlet. I mean, I don't write songs per se, but I was just fascinated with the technical side of it. And I was learning these programs on my computer. And whenever I talked to this guy about it, he'd just hand me another DVD with more stuff. And I would just, just absorbed. That was probably around 98, I think, 1998.
Sounds about right. Windows 97.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I started to learn a couple of those music programs, DAWs, they're called, digital audio workstations. There was a couple in there. Cubase was one of them that got me really going. I was just like fast. I loved the look of it. I loved sort of just the feel of it. I had this little thing called an M-Box at the time. It was the first version. And actually, before I even did the M-Box, I had this other crappier thing that never really worked well. But it allowed you to plug in your instrument and it allowed you to record stuff. And I literally got myself like I think it was a Shure 57 microphone. And I had one microphone and like a couple of cables, and that was it. That started the whole thing. And it was kind of interesting because the first recording I think I did, I was showing Chris Brown, actually. I wasn't living in New York at the time, and I was staying with him once. I was showing him my computer and like, look what I've got, like this, I can record you. And he was like, oh, that's amazing, because his neighbor, and who became my neighbor, she was doing a film. She was making an independent film, and they needed some soundtrack stuff. And I was like, well, I can do it right here. Why don't we just set you up? And so he did some stuff, and I recorded him. And that was like the very first thing I ever recorded.
Interesting.
And I think his mind was blown, and my mind was blown.
So this was before Chris became a recording engineer too.
Yeah. I don't take credit for starting Chris, but I was definitely doing it before him.
Interesting.
And probably a couple of years. I don't think Chris really came around to it for at least 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And but that got me going. That was like the very first thing where I actually sort of almost from start to finish, recorded something and handed it back to somebody, and that got sent to his neighbor, and I think they used it,
Neat.
and it was like holy. And then it just like, you know, that sort of opened up a couple of different doors. I was doing sort of more of that and kind of goofing around, and I would meet people, songwriters who were looking to demo things, and I'd be like, well, I've got this thing, man, you can come over and we'll just set you up and you can just record them. And that literally just kept on sort of snowballing into the next thing. And before I knew it, and I was touring too, so every little town I'd go into, I'd hit the pawn shops. I'd find like, so I started with a 57, SM57. Next thing you know, I have an Audio Technica, 2020. And then I was like, ooh, wow, a condenser mic. That's pretty neat. And I learn about condenser mics, and then I'd start looking for them. And, and I the knowledge kind of comes with the territory. So the more that you look, the more there is to know. And I got fascinated by the gear. I started to understand what it did. It was a big learning curve. It was like a mountain. And even now, like with all of my stuff, my surroundings, I'm surrounded by gear. My place is insane right now with gear.
Can you pick up your whatever I'm looking at? And because I know it's on the other side of you because I've been here. Yeah, there we go.
This is the master control, I suppose. But then there's lots of rack gear, lots of instruments, mixing console. This is my studio at the moment. I'm in the midst of working on a soundtrack with Teilhard.
Oh, really?
So
for a film?
Actually, it's for a festival parade, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an interesting. He was
festival parade. I don't even know what that means. I don't think I know what a parade is, and I know what a festival is, but I don't know what a soundtrack for a festival parade. It's an unusual thing.
So he was commissioned by somebody in Kingston, who is involved in a parade. It's a festival that happens in Holland, called the Bosch Festival, and it's a parade of floats. It's kind of like Carnival for anyone who is familiar with Carnival. It's like these big floats that are like they're informed by Hieronymus Bosch paintings.
Whoa!
It's a celebration of Hieronymus Bosch, and who's an artist.
I'll put a link. I'll put a link in this video for Hieronymus Bosch because no one's going to believe what they're about to see.
Check out the Bosch Festival because these huge floats like float down the canals and stuff, and people enjoy them, and they're musical. There's all sorts of different facets to it, and people are. It's a parade. It's like a parade of floats, and people party, and it's
the music for Hieronymus Bosch Festival. It's got to be freaking weird.
So somebody, I'm not 100% sure who it is, but somebody has commissioned Teilhard. They're going to try to recreate that here, and they're going to start. I think at the woolen. Is it the woolen mill?
They're doing this in Kingston.
Yeah, so that's right.
No way. Okay, I thought you were going to send it to Holland.
They're attempting to do it here. So Teilhard has been commissioned to provide some music that follows these floats, and there's a couple of different floats that we're doing music for, and it's an interesting thing. So Teilhard came over here. He's kind of like the Pee Wee Herman of instruments. Like he's got so many unusual instruments that he's collected over the years. He's got hundreds and hundreds of them, and he's brought a huge array of things, and we've been recording this music for these specific floats.
What a cool project.
And it's an interesting, creative, fun project for sure. And but my studio is kind of just chock full of really interesting things at the moment.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, Mr. Mercer, we've been going for well over an hour and a half, which
we have.
which has flown by. But with respect to the young humans who are watching, I think we should probably put a little bow on this.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
Okay.
Well, I really appreciate what you're doing. I actually think that this is a really great thing to do because it provides threads for people. I mean, for us, when we were younger, we had to find those threads. It was it was harder to find, but I had teachers who taught me in all of these funny areas that I've developed. And, it's really, really cool that you're doing it for your students and for the younger generation, because the threads are there. You just have to find them and pull on them.
Yeah. And I just like the idea that that creatives can sort of like make explicit, right? That these choices are out there, and that these sort of mind head spaces and attitudes and impulses are, it's part of the cultural fabric, right? But it's you like the image of the thread, right? That you don't know that the fabric's there until someone like points it and starts pulling on it a little bit. And
yeah, and you might not even be aware of it yourself. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, this is a thread.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's reeling it in.
I think what's one of the, as an educator, like one of my favorite sort of phrases, maybe, or is to make the implicit explicit, right? So that we could just sort of go through life, yada yada yada, not really reflecting on the importance of moments, right? But to explicitly point out, like, no, what you're feeling in your heart when you're painting or when you're with your friends and you're doing something cool, like pause, respect that moment and give it a name and value that damn thing, because that is maybe the most important, most human, most full of potential feeling you had. But somehow our culture doesn't necessarily give it currency, right? It doesn't necessarily have value. It's just like, oh, that was fun hanging out with my friends and we made that float, or like we did paper mache and we laughed and it was great. But now I got to go into the serious. I got to do my math homework, right? Like that's the serious business.
Yeah.
And to I just want to make that explicit to people, that those moments of joy and community and laughter and creativity and even silliness and strangeness and wackiness, like they can have gravity and importance, and they can drive a life. They can be a thread that you can hold on to. And as an adult I feel very lucky to have been able to hold on to those threads and build community and friends and
totally,
art.
man.
And I'm just like,
for me,
yeah.
It comes down to what Warren Zevon said: enjoy every sandwich. You've got to enjoy every sandwich.
That's nice. I haven't heard that. All right. Ow.
Go enjoy your sandwich.
Yeah, buddy. Peace and love, my friend.
Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I'll be talking to you soon.
Yeah, buddy. I will on my, where the students will get like a little sort of reflection piece. And if you don't mind, I'll say, if you have any questions for Jason, you won't get them directly, but if I do get any, I'll toss them your way and figure out a way to keep the circle unbroken.
Provide any links for people or things that I remember talking about, then
that might be nice. If you could just maybe email me on the correspondence we had, like even Hieronymus Bosch or Tony Trischka or
Defranco, for sure.
Andy Defranco. Yeah, just maybe throw me a list of things just so I'll put them in there for the good peeps to follow the threads. All right.
You got Gary Raspberry.
I've already done an interview with him and NTR. So, and I'm going to do Chris. So like, we're going to all be spokes on a wheel pretty damn soon, buddy.
Yeah, man.
All right. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
See you later. Catch you.